His simple infidelity leads him to a complicated and very dangerous situation. Hello, and welcome back to the story. Today we will be making a recap of a 2005 movie titled Derailed. Warning, there will be some spoilers ahead, so watch at your own risk and enjoy. The story begins with a man in prison who lights a cigarette and writes on a notebook. He starts the note with "The morning it all began." Flashback to the month of October. A man named Charles is hastily preparing his breakfast. His wife Deanna checks their daughter's blood sugar because she is diabetic. While eating his breakfast, Charles helps her daughter with her book report. Charles is on a train when the conductor starts collecting tickets. He finds out that he failed to buy one, and he has no cash in his wallet. The conductor tells him that he needs to get off the train at the next stop. A woman named Lucinda offers to pay for his ticket. Charles thanks her and promises to pay her back. They chat and start to flirt with each other. We find out that Lucinda is a financial advisor on a company called Avery Price, while Charles is a commercial executive. When they reach the station, Charles tells Lucinda that he will pay her back if she will be on the same train tomorrow. Lucinda says it's a date. At work, Charles chats with Winston, the mailroom guy, who asks for help on a baseball quiz given by his police uncle. He then goes to a meeting where a client is not pleased with his work. His boss Elliot has to move the account to a different executive, making Charles lose potential commission. That evening, Charles is helping Amy review for the exam. He pities the situation of his daughter who looks pale and has a machine attached to her. Charles later drinks alone and starts to cry. His wife arrives and hugs him. The next day, Charles meets Lucinda on the train. They talk about their life and their job. Lucinda shows him the picture of her daughter, and the two find out that both of them are married. At work, Charles opens the website of Avery Price and finds the profile of Lucinda. He calls the company's number and asks for her. The two later have lunch together. Lucinda shares that her husband is so busy and that they couldn't find time with each other. One night, Charles wakes up to the alarm on his daughter's monitor, so he rushes to her room and finds her having a seizure. He calls his wife, who hurriedly injects insulin on her. Deanna cries as she tries to warm her daughter. The next day, Charles is having lunch with Lucinda again, and he tells her about his daughter's condition. He says they have mortgaged their house just to buy her dialysis machine. Charles says they tried kidney transplant thrice, but her body keeps rejecting them. He says that there is a new anti-rejection medicine, which is very expensive, but has a 99% success rate. They have been saving for it in years, and now they just wait for its release. Charles calls his wife and tells her that he will be home late because of work. He goes to a bar with Lucinda, and they drink. He gets to kiss her, and outside the bar, they continue making out. They ride a cab, and while searching for a hotel, Lucinda suddenly asks the driver to stop and tells Charles that she can no longer do it. He says he understands, but when they see a discreet hotel across the street, they both look at each other and smile. The front desk asks if they want to use the hotel safe, and Charles declines. They get inside the room and start making out. They start to do it in bed when suddenly a man barges in and points a gun at Lucinda. He takes their wallet and bag and finds out that both of them are cheating. He starts harassing Lucinda, and when Charles tries to stop him, he gets beaten up. With the gun pointed at her, the man forces himself into Lucinda while Charles lies on the floor, bloodied, and later passes out. Charles wakes up and finds Lucinda staring blankly while sitting in bed. He apologizes and says he will call the police. Lucinda stops him because her family might know, and they later leave the hotel. At his house, Charles tells his wife that he got mugged. Deanne says she hates the city and asks him to just quit his job and go back to teaching. Charles says it won't be enough for their daughter's medication. A while later, the phone rings, and when Charles answers it, it is the man who assaulted them in the hotel. He finds out that the man's name is LaRoche. He asks Charles for $20,000, or he will tell his family about his affair. Charles has got no choice and says he will give him the money. One day, Charles visits Lucinda in their office. Charles insists that they call the police, and Lucinda says no again, because if her husband finds out, he will file a divorce and take her daughter. Lucinda says they should not see each other anymore, and she leaves. He notices the receptionist staring and he calls her out. That night, Charles stares at the spreadsheet of his savings account. After thinking it over, Charles decides to withdraw it. The next day, he goes to the place that LaRoche told him. A man named Dexter approaches him and brings him to where LaRoche is waiting. Charlie gives him the money, and when they confirm it, LaRoche punches him, saying that is for canceling his credit card, and they leave. It is November. Outside the office, Winston sees Charles smoking, and he tells him about how he got busted in high school for selling illegal substances. Winston shares his experience at the prison where he had to stab a kid using a makeshift knife as self-defense. That night, Charles gets a call from LaRoche, asking again for more money. Charles says he's got no more money for him. He asks how he got his new number, and LaRoche gives him a clue. When Charles looks at his phone, it is their home phone number. Charles rushes to their home, worried. When he arrives, he finds LaRoche talking with his wife. He pretended to be one of his clients, and his wife thinks he is there because he needs Charles to sign a contract. Charles plays along, but when Amy comes down, he panics and asks her to go back upstairs. Deanna introduces Amy to LaRoche, and Charles looks distressed as he sees him kiss her daughter. Charles then interrupts them and says he will sign the contract now. When his wife and daughter leave, Charles tells LaRoche to get out. LaRoche then clinches his balls and tells him to give him his $100,000, and he will not bother him anymore. Charles says yes, and LaRoche lets him go. He leaves, and Charles is left crying. The next day, Charles talks with Jerry, his lawyer. Jerry says they cannot pin down LaRoche because they did not file a police report during the incident at the hotel. He says the only way is for Lucinda to come forward. Charles tells Lucinda about it, but she still does not want to go to the police. Lucinda then tells him that she had an abortion, which means she got pregnant by LaRoche that night. That evening, Charles asks Winston for advice. He tells Charles that he will scare LaRoche off for him. He tries to refuse his help, but Winston says he owes him when Charles did not report him for stealing computers. Charles says he does not owe him anything, so Winston proposes to just pay him 10 grand to scare off LaRoche. The next day, Charles receives a note from LaRoche which says when and where he would send the money. He sees Winston, and Charles calls the accountant saying he needs 10 grand for a commercial spot. The two later drive to the location an hour early. Charles gives him the payment, and Winston takes out an unloaded gun to scare LaRoche. He also gives Charles a makeshift knife he used to stab a kid in prison. While Winston is talking about his plan, there is a sudden bang and Winston drops dead. LaRoche just shot him and takes out the $10,000 from his pocket. He tells Charles that it is his fault, and he leaves. Charles wipes the fingerprints and runs away. When he arrives home, he finds out that Winston's knife is still in his pocket. At the office, the accountant asks for receipt of commercial spot, and he says he will give it today. A detective named Franklin approaches him and says that Winston was murdered last night. Charles acts shocked, and the detective says Winston is very close to him. He is the police uncle that Winston was referring to. Franklin asks him where was he last night. He says that he was at work, and Franklin asks if there is someone who could confirm that. The phone ring interrupts them, and when Charles answers it, it is LaRoche. He says he has Lucinda held hostage and threatens to kill her. LaRoche also threatens to kill Charles' wife and daughter if he does not meet him in 20 minutes. Charles says he is ready to give him the money, and LaRoche gives him the address, and he hastily leaves. Charles goes to the bank and withdraws $100,000 and proceeds to the address LaRoche gave him, which is the apartment of Lucinda. Inside, he sees Dexter pointing a gun at her, and Charles gives LaRoche the money. After scaring him, LaRoche leaves and tells him that he will never bother him again. Lucinda says sorry, that he has to use the money for his daughter's medicine. Charles says it is over. What's important is that she is safe, and so is his family, and he leaves. Franklin finds Charles in a bar. He says the bartender saw him and Winston drinking there recently. The detective asks him again where was he last night because no one can confirm if he was at the office. He says he was alone. Franklin gives up and invites Charles and his lawyer to his office. He makes a threat to whoever killed Winston, and he leaves. One night, Deanna sees Charles drinking. He confesses that the money they saved for Amy's medicine is gone. Deanna cries and asks what has he done. She says it is 7 years of savings. Charles tells her everything. Charles and his lawyer Jerry are on their way to the detective, but Charles says he needs to tell Lucinda first. He arrives at Avery Price and asks the front desk for Lucinda. The receptionist tells him she just arrived. Charles says that's not her. He's referring to the lady she talked with in the lobby. The receptionist says it was a temporary staff and she already quit last week. Charles is confused. He goes back to her apartment and finds out that it was just rented by a couple and they left already. When the agent hands him the brochure, he sees that it is the picture of the girl that Lucinda claimed to be her daughter. Charles goes to the station and finds Lucinda. He follows her, and when he is about to confront her, a man approaches and talks to her. He seems to be Lucinda's new victim. Charles continues following her until he sees her approach LaRoche and kisses him. Dexter later arrives and the three of them leave. Charles goes back to the hotel and checks in. His lawyer says that if LaRoche is caught, the money won't be returned because it will become the state's evidence. Charles says he needs to take care of it himself because he needs to get Amy's money back. We later see Lucinda and her new victim checking in at a hotel. Dexter, who pretends to be a security guard, hands money to the front desk. When LaRoche arrives, we can see that Charles was just hiding behind them. While the two are waiting at the elevator, Charles runs to the top floor using the stairs. He arrives before them, and he quickly hides in his room. When Dexter left, Charles takes the lampstand and leaves the room. LaRoche is busy opening the door with a card, when Charles knocks him out with the stand. He takes out his gun and gets inside, carrying LaRoche. The guy freaks out and Charles tells him that he's in a scam. Lucinda says she does not know what Charles is talking about. Charles tells the guy their MO, where she meets him on a train. She acts sweet, and shows a picture of her made-up daughter. LaRoche would then rob him, and he can't call the police, because he will try protect Lucinda. LaRoche later wakes up and mocks Charles. Charles punches him and asks for his money back. Lucinda tells LaRoche to just give him his money and they leave. LaRoche declines, and the guy tries to grab the gun out of Charles. The gun goes off and accidentally hits Lucinda. Dexter hears the gunshot, and tries to get inside the room. Meanwhile, LaRoche takes out his spare gun, and shoots the guy multiple times. LaRoche gets mad when he sees Lucinda and he tries to shoot Charles, but he is out of bullets. Dexter breaks the door open, but Charles manages to steal his gun and shoots LaRoche. Dexter wrestles with him and using LaRoche's gun, he shoots down Dexter. When the police arrive, Charles is in his room and tells them that he heard gunshots, and he saw the security guard run towards the room. He closed the door and hid. The officer thanks him for his statement and leaves. Detective Franklin arrives and he finds out that the gun in the scene is the same gun used in killing Winston. The other detective concluded that the couple got mugged, security tried to help, and everyone got shot. When the police officers are emptying out the hotel safe, Charles finds his briefcase and shows his ID to claim it. The officer checks the tag and confirms it, so he gives it to him. Inside is the money that LaRoche and Lucinda took from him. The next day at work, Charles sees Elliot and the accountant in his office. Elliot accuses him of stealing the $10,000 he said was for a commercial spot. Charles says it was an emergency and he was gonna pay it back. Elliot says they already took legal action and tells Charles to just pay it back, and the most he'll get is community service. It is now December. Charles arrives at the prison, where he serves his community service as a teacher of the inmates. When he checks their notebooks, Charles notices one with the word sidetracked written on the cover. He reads it and it begins with "The morning it all began," which narrates the whole story of Charles, from the train, to when he found out the scam, and up until the shooting incident at the hotel. At the end of the note, it says, when Charles finished reading the story, he went to the laundry room. Charles leaves the classroom and proceeds to the laundry room. There, he hears a man saying, Charles never checked if he made it out of the hotel alive. When Charles approaches him, he finds out that it is LaRoche. He pins Charles to the wall and tells him he ended up in the wrong prison. Charles then tells him that he chose this prison. The makeshift knife drops from his sleeve and Charles stabs LaRoche with it until he perishes. When Charles is about to leave the prison, he runs into Detective Franklin, who asks him what happened. He says he used the bathroom and the guy jumped at him with a knife. The detective says that Charles brought the knife and the law doesn't care who he kills. Charles gets worried, but then Franklin says, the law didn't care much for Winston either. The detective lets him go. Charles smiles and leaves. He arrives home and is greeted by his wife. They see their daughter, who now looks healthier, as she runs to catch her school bus. Did you like our movie recap? Please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. To be updated for new movie recaps, hit the notification bell.